Hello everyone and welcome back to Build for Every Block. Today's block of choice is barrels. Now I'll be honest, despite their practical functionality, I don't really use them for that purpose. They really are just a decoration block that can be used for a functional purpose. Really, I'd rather just use chests, like any other normal individual, because it makes managing inventories so much more efficient. However, chests are not very aesthetic. So I guess that's where barrels went out, and this build will have lots of them, as you would expect. Now with that being said, let's get to planning, shall we? To the reference board. For starters, the theme for this block is obvious. A medieval tavern. Doing anything else just doesn't make sense when something so obvious is just staring directly at me. However, with that being said, I'd say that medieval is probably one of my weaker styles. With some of the other builds under my belt, some that I've shown on this channel, I've been doing styles that I haven't really done before, like Gothic. However, I think I executed that pretty decently. Medieval is a bit different. It is a style that I've tried before, however, they never really turn out the way I want them to. So, hopefully this time will be a little bit different. And you're goddamn right, it did. So, for starters, let's get the overall shape down. Medieval is a pretty straightforward style in terms of complexity. It has iconic shapes and patterns, but nothing in isolation is incredible. It's all about the overall look, not the individual piece. As the saying goes, it's greater than the sum of its parts, and that definitely applies to medieval, in my opinion. For instance, the walls are typically segmented into rectangular or square segments with basic patterns put in them, either cross-shape, diagonal boards, or some windows. In order to make something in medieval interesting, depth is the main toy you'll be playing with just a hint of texture, but you're also going to be using shape to help you tremendously. So, the first picture I'll be using to get my overall shape will be this one. Now this one isn't anything special, as it's just a simple small base, bigger upper floor, as is common with this style. I did think of changing the floor pattern a little, however I got away with just a square base with the help of some other parts being more interesting. Now the lower floor will be using this image, however the upper floor will be using a slightly different style, as this image didn't really show off the upper floor too well. So I need something to kind of fill that blank, which will be this image. With this, the upper floor of my tavern will utilize a slightly different aesthetic. Not necessarily cobblestone, but still different. I wanted to focus more on the white aspect of the palette here, to better pronounce the wood boards. As for the roof, I used this image as a base for the palette. I did not copy the shape as I didn't want a round roof, so I decided to use a more traditional approach while still being different. The roof will be curved inwards to make it pointy at the top and flatter near the bottom. I did this because the typical 2-block slant that you see for stereotypical medieval roofs is too tall for this type of build. Now this roof also has an additional special feature, which will be the bend in the middle, which will help add more interesting shapes to this build. But the main reason why I didn't want to utilize the stereotypical medieval roof was because I didn't want half the height of the build to be the roof, because that always looks goofy. So if I curve the roof, I can still have that pointy top, but it doesn't result in the roof being too tall. And finally, we have the interior, which is based off of this image. The interior here isn't anything special, as it's just a stereotypical tavern interior, and I just kind of wanted to base off of this while still adding a bit of flavor when I get around to it. And of course, a tavern usually has a cellar of sorts, so I used this image as a reference for that. Overall, the thing I wanted to focus on here was the arched stone pillars, as this is what I wanted the barrels to rest between. With all those images combined, I can now create the final product. But first, I have to create a quick and dirty plan, just so that everything fits together nicely. The layout of the tavern is 2-tiered with a center bar. I changed the plan slightly when executing, as the bar took up too much space, as I had kind of overestimated the amount of space available to me. Overall, the layout I think is really good. I like the open space that is created by having an open center from the upper roof. It really helps make the space feel more connected, as any bar should be open to encourage patron socialization, as I would like to say, but I'm sure lots of bars don't really focus on that too much. So the holes play two main roles here, which are making the lower floor feel bigger than it actually is, and making the upper floor feel connected to the lower floor. So with everything now kosher, for the plan, let's get to building, shall we? So first things first, we're going to make the basement, as it'll be a pain to show the basement with everything on top, so we're going to do it first. The overall design is pretty simple here, a central pillar with 4 pillars off of the corners. I thought of having the center open, as it would allow for more space. However, as I planned on having barrels stored here, I thought it would just be easier to just use those 4 pillars to create nooks off of the center one to then store the barrels in those. Otherwise, the barrels would just obstruct an open space, and I didn't like how that looked, so I opted for a more closed room. And since this is a cellar, those aren't necessarily known for being very open concept. Also, because this is a tavern, you know some of the workers are going to help themselves, so I added some red carpet next to the pots to emulate some spilt wine. Because we all know that if the alcohol here is worth a damn, that both the workers and customers are going to be drinking. Because, obviously. Now for the ground floor. The walls here are going to be made out of stone bricks, polished andesite, and stone. Having it be more than just stone bricks helps with the monotony of the pattern. However, I will be adding more details later to help alleviate this. There will be spruce beams in between as well, as I will have barrels on top of those beams to help emulate beam ties, just to help integrate more barrels into the build. Not that that necessarily needs to be even more, but, you know, a little goes a long ways, as they say. Now, as far as interiors go, taverns are pretty straightforward. Some tables, a bar, and some miscellaneous decorations like pots for cups. One thing I kept in mind for the interior was table spacing. Interior flow is incredibly important. Having a clear walkway to the second floor was one of the things I made sure to keep in mind, and then filled all that empty space with tables and chairs. The reason for this is because a tavern wants to have as many people inside as possible, because it's good business. So fitting as many tables and chairs just makes sense, and any good tavern has enough space if you try hard enough. Also, I added some more carpets here because we all know that drunk customers are clumsy ones. As for the bar, it's pretty simple. Since my original plan had it in the middle, I had to change plans just a little bit, and I moved it into the back, as do most bars. So, behind the counter, I added some barrels and stacked them on top of each other, and used levers to emulate keg spouts. And I also added a cauldron sink just for some extra flavor. Now for the upstairs. More or less the same concepts as the main floor, stuff as many tables and chairs as possible without blocking the walkways too much. And of course the center hole so the upper floor can see what's happening on the lower floor. Also, there's a balcony section with some extras outside to further distinguish the upper and lower floors. Having 2 floors that are very similar can make the interior feel bland, and having key distinguishing features can help alleviate that problem. Now for the roof. Probably the most iconic part of any medieval building. However, I'll be doing a slightly different variation, as the stereotypical version will make this look ridiculous, as mentioned before. If the roof is 50% or greater than the height of the build without reason for doing so, for instance, an example would be a Gothic cathedral, where the style is conducive of very tall ceilings, very tall roofs in fact, but medieval, not so much, so it looks kind of goofy. Now, as I said before, I'm going to curve the roof to save some space, while still having that pointy top, because that is important to the style of the build. So, instead of having the whole roof having the same angle, I can curve it to save on some height near the edges, and also still have that pointy top, because that's exactly what I need. Also, I added another feature, which is I kind of drooped the middle of the roof, which will help add some extra character to the roof. As far as the roof palette, I wanted to emulate having some shingles, so I used bricks and mud bricks, while using granite to smooth the transition between the two. Overall, I think this roof turned out amazing. It has the color I was going for, and I was able to create a roof that doesn't look goofy, because at the end of the day, that's what everyone's trying to do. For any of you having trouble with roofs, experimenting with a variety of angles can help, as a standard 45 can sometimes just not look right, or just doesn't fit the theme of the build very well. So I implore you guys to experiment with your roofs. After all, you gotta cap off your builds with something that fits the build well. A good roof can separate a good builder from a great one. Also, don't be discouraged when they don't look good, as we've all made roofs that look bad. You are not alone in that feeling. Now it's time for the finishing touches. For starters, let's put something underneath the balcony, shall we? I thought of adding a small stable, just because this is a medieval building, so obviously adding a stable makes sense, right? Well, I don't know how sound that logic is, because I don't know how many people are going to be riding their horses to a tavern. However, I still think it looks great. As for the rest of the exterior, I thought of just adding some greenery in the form of some vines. Overall, these vines really complete the look I was going after, and ties in nicely with the name I gave the place, the Twisted Vine. And with that, the tavern is finished. Overall, I'm really proud of this build. The style I don't usually get right, as they either look really bland or they just look off. So you kind of have to start all over, and it's really annoying. However, this time I really focused on making sure that every single piece was as good as I could get it. Because at the end of the day, it's the sum of its parts, right? So, I had to focus on each individual section and make sure that they really pulled the whole build together. Now, as always, if you enjoyed the build, make sure to leave a like down below, but that's all from me. See you guys next time.